On the outskirts of Amsterdam, there is a courtroom that doesn't exist on any public map. Reinforced walls, armored vehicles parked outside, snipers positioned on the roof, and judges who refuse to have their names made public, because the last few people who got too close to this case were shot dead before they ever made it to the stand. In the center of the room, behind a bulletproof glass booth, sits a man named Ridwan Taghi. Not long ago, this same man was having a very ordinary evening in a penthouse apartment somewhere above Dubai, while 5,000 kilometers away in the Netherlands, people were being murdered on his behalf in broad daylight. The Netherlands is one of the wealthiest and most stable countries in the world, which makes it easy to forget that it also happens to sit at the mouth of one of Europe's most important shipping routes, and that the port of Rotterdam, the busiest in all of Europe, moves so much cargo every single day that nobody can realistically check what's inside every container. And the people who move cocaine into Europe know that better than anyone. By the mid-2000s, the Dutch underworld had quietly grown into one of the most powerful criminal ecosystems on the continent, producing a generation of traffickers who were sophisticated, internationally connected, and almost completely invisible to the outside world. Taghi was the hardest of all of them to see coming, a man from a small Dutch town called Vianen, who never finished school, but who turned out to have a natural talent for running a criminal organization, and who by the time he was in his late 30s was allegedly coordinating cocaine shipments worth hundreds of millions of euros from hotel rooms in countries where the Dutch police couldn't touch him. What separated Taghi from other traffickers of his generation wasn't really the scale of the operation. It was what happened to people who created problems for him. Between 2015 and 2019, his network is believed to have ordered at least 14 murders inside the Netherlands, and these weren't quiet or discreet affairs. They happened outside gyms, in supermarket parking lots, on residential streets in the middle of the afternoon, in front of whoever happened to be standing nearby at the time. Dutch investigators had a word for it: liquidation violence. And what made it so destabilizing wasn't just the body count, but the message it sent to anyone thinking about cooperating with police, which was that the organization knew where you were, knew who you cared about, and had already thought through what it was willing to do about both. In 2017, Dutch prosecutors opened an investigation they called Marengo, and the goal was pretty straightforward: find Taghi, build a case airtight enough to survive the most aggressive legal defense money could buy, and do it without getting anyone else killed in the process. The problem was witnesses, or rather the near total absence of them, because everyone in that world understood exactly what had happened to the last few people who'd talked, and most of them had made a rational calculation that prison was preferable to what the alternative might look like. Then a man named Nabil changed his mind. Nabil was a peripheral figure in Taghi's network, a courier, an errand runner, who'd been arrested and was staring at a significant sentence, and in what investigators would later describe as a turning point in the entire investigation, he agreed to become a state witness and tell them everything he knew. His brother was shot dead on a street in Utrecht within weeks, but Nabil kept talking. While Marengo was slowly building its case, Taghi had made himself comfortable in Dubai, which by the late 2000s had developed a quiet reputation among European organized crime figures as a city where the weather was good and the lifestyle was excellent. He kept running his network remotely, encrypted phones, coded language, layers of intermediaries between himself and anything that could be traced back to him. And for a while, it seemed like this arrangement might simply continue indefinitely. Then in December 2019, acting on an Interpol alert, Dubai police walked into an apartment in the city and found Ridwan Taghi inside. And 6 days later, he was on a plane back to the Netherlands in handcuffs. And the Dutch public, which had been following this story with something between fascination and dread, allowed itself a moment of relief. This is Youssef Taghi, Ridwan's nephew. He had qualified as a criminal defense lawyer, which gave him a legal right to walk into a maximum security prison and have a private, unmonitored conversation with the most dangerous inmate in the country whenever he wanted. In 2022, Dutch authorities discovered he had allegedly been using those visits to pass intelligence from inside the prosecution directly back to his uncle, identifying witnesses, locating informants, figuring out exactly who needed to be silenced before they could testify. By then, 2 people closest to the prosecution were already dead: Nabil's lawyer, shot on his own doorstep on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and the Netherlands' most celebrated crime journalist, shot in the head on a busy Amsterdam street in 2021 and dead 9 days later. What followed was the longest criminal trial in Dutch history, and Tagi's strategy was almost insulting in its simplicity. Say nothing, deny everything, delay as long as possible, because cases have a way of falling apart on their own. For a while, it almost worked. Then came July 2nd, 2024. Guilty on all counts, life in prison, no parole. And for the first time in the entire case, Ridwan Taghi had nothing left to say. Nabil is still alive somewhere, under a name that isn't his own, having not seen his family freely in years. Taghi will die in prison. The cocaine still moves through Rotterdam under different management, different phones, different names, and somewhere above a different city, in a different penthouse, someone is probably having a very ordinary evening.